If you ask someone today to define what the internet actually is, they usually describe it uh, like a utility.
Right, like water from a tap.
Exactly, like water or electricity. It functions as this invisible, omnipresent infrastructure that powers everything you do.
And crucially, it's mostly free at the point of access.
Right. It operates largely through software, and you can just wander through it aimlessly for hours. You jump from a video of a cat to a highly technical academic paper, and there's just zero friction.
It's completely seamless.
But I want you to step out of that modern mindset for a moment. For today's deep dive, imagine you are sitting in a living room staring at a cathode ray tube television.
A heavy, glowing box.
Yeah, exactly. And to even get a glimpse of this digital world, you first have to purchase a highly specific proprietary piece of physical hardware just to get past the front door.
Which is wild to think about today.
It really is. And once you're inside, the environment doesn't feel like an open public square. It feels more like a heavily guarded, exclusive country club.
A very expensive country club.
Well, extremely. Every single minute you spend looking around is tracked by a meter. And if you wander in during standard daytime business hours, you are being charged the modern equivalent of £27 an hour.
Just to look around.
Just to exist in the space. And perhaps the most jarring part, every time you walk into this club, you have to stand completely still in the lobby for several minutes while the actual architecture of the building constructs itself around you from scratch.
I mean, it sounds like an intricate, slightly dystopian vision of a cyberpunk future.
It totally does.
It's the kind of hyper-monetized, hardware-locked ecosystem that modern tech critics are constantly warning us we might stumble into if we aren't careful.
Yeah, that is the assumption you naturally make when you hear a description like that. You think, oh, this is some terrifying corporate future. But we are not looking at a dystopian projection of the future. We are actually looking deep into the past.
Right.
Our deep dive today is taking us all the way back to December of 1984.
The golden era of the Commodore 64.
The absolute peak of the C64 microcomputer, and we have been going through a stack of archival sources for this, but our primary roadmap today is this remarkably detailed review from a magazine called Personal Computer World.
Written by Tony Hetherington, right?
Yes, Tony Hetherington. And he is reviewing a newly launched network system known as Compunet.
Compunet is just, it's one of those technological artifacts that forces you to completely reevaluate the timeline of digital history.
Completely.
Because it's a brilliant, highly ambitious, and just deeply strange piece of engineering.
It really is. And our mission today is to thoroughly unpack this 1984 walled garden. Because as we navigate through Tony's review and all the surrounding documentation, it becomes eerily clear that Compunet wasn't just some primitive bulletin board system.
No, not at all.
It successfully predicted and actually implemented the foundational architecture of our modern digital lives. We're going to explore how they engineered microtransactions, draconian hardware-level digital rights management, and a fully functional App Store creator economy.
Decades before anyone had even conceptualized a smartphone.
Exactly. And this exploration really inverts the standard historical narrative we've all been taught, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we tend to view the early internet as this wild, ungoverned academic frontier. That it was inherently open and free.
Right. The Wild West.
Yeah. And the story goes that it only became locked down, walled off, and aggressively monetized by these massive tech conglomerates in the last 10 or 15 years.
Right.
But looking at the source material for Compunet proves that the highly monetized, completely locked down, heavily curated ecosystem that wasn't a modern corruption of the internet, it was actually there from the very beginning.
So to understand how Commodore engineered this walled garden, we have to start with the physical toll bridge they built to keep people out.
The hardware barrier.
Yeah, because accessing Compunet wasn't just a matter of opening a piece of software or typing a URL into a browser. They required you to alter the physical anatomy of your computer.
Right, the barrier to entry was entirely hardware-based. To even become a user on the Compunet system, you had to acquire a specific piece of proprietary hardware manufactured by Commodore.
And Tony Hetherington describes it in his review.
Yeah, he describes it as a rather undistinguished black plastic box.
Just a black box.
Literally. Functionally, it was a modem, but its form factor was highly specific. It was designed to plug directly into the expansion cartridge slot on the back of the Commodore 64.
I was looking at the schematics and the photos of this setup in the archive, and it is a logistical nightmare by modern standards.
Oh, it's terrible.
You have this chunky black plastic cartridge jutting out of the back of the computer, and trailing out of that plastic box is a permanent 3-meter-long cable that terminates in a standard British telecom jack plug.
Which is just a massive trip hazard.
Right, which meant you had to physically route this cable across your living room or bedroom floor to wherever your main telephone socket was located.
Which introduces a whole layer of mid-1980s domestic friction.
Oh, the family arguments.
Exactly. You are physically tethering your personal computer to the family landline. So if you are online exploring Compunet, nobody else in the house can make or receive a phone call.
You are holding the household's primary communication method hostage.
You are. You're completely blocking the line.
And the domestic friction is nothing compared to the financial fiction. When I first read the pricing structure in the source material, I honestly had to run the numbers twice.
It's shocking.
I thought I was misunderstanding the text. In December 1984, the upfront retail price for this undistinguished black plastic box was £99.99.
Just for the box.
Just for the box. And purchasing the hardware also locked you into a mandatory first-year annual subscription fee of £30.
Which we really need to put into perspective for the listener.
Yes, please. To understand the gravity of that investment, we have to apply a 2026 inflation-adjusted multiplier, which means multiplying those 1984 figures by roughly 4.17.
Right. And when you apply that inflation adjustment, the economic reality of being an early adopter becomes incredibly stark.
Yeah.
That initial £99 hardware cost translates to roughly £417 in today's money.
Wow.
You are paying over £400 for a modem that has zero utility outside of connecting to this single proprietary network.
That is absurd. And that £30 annual subscription translates to another £125 a year?
Yeah.
So before your television screen has even flickered, before you have seen a single pixel of this network or downloaded a single byte of data, you have surrendered well over £500.
It's a massive capital expenditure for a home hobbyist in 1984.
It immediately signals that Compunet was not positioning itself as a casual toy for children playing video games.
No, definitely not.
They were building a premium service for a highly committed demographic.
It acts as an aggressive financial filter. I mean, anyone who goes to the trouble of spending £417 on a plastic cartridge and stringing a 3-meter cable across their carpet, they are highly motivated to extract value from the system.
They have to justify the purchase.
Exactly. They have a vested financial interest in making the experience work.
And that brings us to the actual experience of making it work. Let's walk through the getting started process that Tony details in his review.
It's quite the ritual.
It really is, because the architecture of how a user actually logged onto this system defies every assumption we have about how networks should operate.
The sequence of events required to establish a connection was agonizingly deliberate and mechanically complex.
You start by turning on your Commodore 64. You are greeted by that standard, stark blue screen with the flashing cursor. You have to type the word connect directly into the command prompt.
Yeah.
Then you follow that command with one of the specific telephone numbers for a Compunet access point. And the review points out that there were 12 of these physical access points distributed throughout the UK.
Which, in the context of 1984 telecommunications, was actually a huge selling point.
How so?
What is a crucial piece of infrastructure. In the 1980s, British Telecom heavily differentiated between local phone calls and long-distance trunk calls.
Oh, right. Trunk calls were astronomically expensive.
Exactly. By distributing 12 access nodes across the country, Compunet was attempting to ensure that the majority of their user base could reach the network via a much cheaper local call, rather than paying exorbitant long-distance rates just to reach a central server in London.
That makes sense. So you type the local number, you hit the return key, and then the physical machinery takes over.
You just sit there.
You sit there in your living room, and you listen to the modem physically dialing the rotary or tone pulses over the line. You wait for the distant server to answer.
And then you hear that chaotic, screeching handshake of two modems negotiating a connection.
That classic dial-up scream?
Yeah.
Once that connection is established, the screen prompts you to input your specific user ID and your password. And once you pass that authentication check, you enter the second waiting period.
And this is where it gets weird.
This is the part of the engineering architecture that I found genuinely baffling. What exactly is the Commodore 64 doing during this secondary wait phase?
This is perhaps the most defining an unorthodox user experience choice in the entire system. Once you successfully authenticated your credentials, you weren't dropped into a menu.
No.
Instead, the Compunet mainframe began physically downloading the entire communications software package directly into the random access memory of your Commodore 64.
Into the RAM.
Yes, and it did this every single time you logged on.
I want to make sure I'm understanding the sequence here and that the listener grasps this. It is not just updating a patch or verifying a license.
No.
It is forcing you to download the actual program required to read the network data over the network itself at the start of every session.
That is exactly the mechanism. Your 400-pound modem cartridge did not contain the interface software.
What did it contain then?
It only contained the rudimentary instructions required to dial the phone and accept the incoming software payload. You are downloading the client application into your machine's volatile RAM.
So when you turn the computer off,
That RAM is wiped clean. So the next time you want to check your messages, you have to download the entire application from scratch all over again.
that is brutal.
Tony notes in his review that this mandatory download process took several minutes to complete before you could even see the main menu.
I am trying to construct a modern analogy for this, and it almost sounds like a joke. Imagine if you wanted to check your bank balance on your phone, but your phone didn't actually have a banking app installed.
Right.
Instead, you had to open a raw command terminal, connect to the bank server, wait 5 minutes for the bank to push the entire banking application into your phone's temporary memory,
Use the app for a few minutes.
and then the second you close it, the app deletes itself entirely.
It seems incredibly hostile to the user's time.
Especially when we look at the bandwidth they were working with. The modem operated at a 12,075 baud rate.
And the baud rate is the critical bottleneck here. 1200 baud downstream means the computer could receive data at a maximum speed of roughly 1200 bits per second.
Which translates to what, practically?
It's about 120 characters of text appearing on your screen every second. It's readable, but it's not instantaneous. But the 75 baud upstream is the real bottleneck.
75 baud upstream. That sounds painfully slow.
It means when you type a command or send an email, your computer's only pushing data out at 75 bits per second. That is excruciating. It is roughly equivalent to a slow typist pecking out letters one by one.
So if Commodore is engineering a system where they intentionally bottleneck the user, forcing them to endure a multi-minute software download over a sluggish 1200 baud connection, every single time they want to look at the network, what is the underlying logic?
Why bleed the user's time so aggressively?
Yes, why design it that way?
The rationale that Compunet provided for this architecture was ultimate flexibility. By forcing the system to download the client software into RAM at every login, the developers on the server side retain total, absolute control over the user interface.
Okay, so they could change it on the fly.
Exactly. If they wanted to introduce a new menu system, add a new service, or patch a security vulnerability, they just updated the file on their mainframe. The next time a user logged in, they automatically downloaded the newest version.
So Commodore never had to manufacture and physically mail out updated floppy disks or replacement ROM cartridges to their user base.
Right. You are always, theoretically, running the most current iteration of the software. It is a very primitive, highly localized execution of what we now call cloud computing or client-side rendering.
That makes sense from a developer standpoint.
Right.
But there has to be a tangible payoff for the user.
Oh, absolutely.
If I'm sitting in my living room, listening to the modem hum, waiting minutes just to see a menu, the eventual destination has to justify that journey.
The justification, and really the primary competitive advantage of Compunet, was visual fidelity. To understand the impact of Compunet, you have to look at the other networks operating in the UK in 1984.
Like Prestel and Micronet.
Yes. Services like Prestel and Micronet were the established players, but those services relied on the videotext standard, which meant they utilized teletext block graphics.
Right. For listeners who didn't grow up with 1980s UK television, teletext graphics are essentially a grid of chunky, jagged, primary color squares.
Like Lego bricks on a screen.
Yeah, it is a very low-resolution mosaic used to build rudimentary shapes and text.
It was functional, but it was visually primitive. It felt like reading a digitized, blocky newspaper. Compunet made a deliberate architectural choice to abandon that teletext standard.
They went for something better.
They decided that sacrificing load times was worth it if they could deliver standard, full-color Commodore graphics over the phone line. They utilized the native high-resolution graphical capabilities of the C64 hardware.
So when you finally got past that multi-minute download, you weren't looking at blocky mosaics.
No, you were looking at detailed, colorful, custom-designed screens that felt like commercial software. You're getting a native premium Commodore experience, just piped in over a telephone wire.
Okay, that context makes the wait slightly more tolerable, but a multi-minute wait every single session is still a massive point of friction.
It really is.
However, Tony's review highlights that the community quickly figured out how to subvert this mandated waiting period. There was actually a specific routine built into the hardware to bypass it.
Yeah. Tony details a highly effective power user hack. The modem's rudimentary firmware contained a built-in command called CNSEE.
CNCE.
Right. If a user was strategic, they would endure that agonizing initial multi-minute download once. And as soon as the communication software was safely loaded into the C64's RAM, they would execute the CNSAV command.
What did that do?
This instructed the computer to take a snapshot of the software in its memory and save it directly to the user's local peripheral, usually a standard audio cassette tape in the dataset drive, or a 1541 floppy disk drive if they were wealthy enough to own one.
So they are essentially caching the application locally to bypass the cloud download.
Precisely. They create a physical backup of the client. The next time that user wanted to log on to Compunet, they wouldn't type connect right away.
They would load it locally?
Instead, they would insert their cassette tape and type CNO load. The computer would read the communication software off the tape and load it into RAM locally, which was vastly faster than pulling it over the phone line.
Oh, that's incredibly smart.
Once it was loaded, then they would type connect to dial the server. The server would recognize that the client software was already present, skip the multi-minute payload delivery, and drop them straight into the authentication menu.
That is a brilliant piece of user agency. You only have to endure the agonizing download from the server if Compunet actively pushes an update that breaks your local version.
Exactly. Otherwise, you are saving minutes of your life.
And crucially, because you aren't dialed into the network while loading from your own cassette tape, you are saving money on your phone bill.
It is a perfect example of 1980s users optimizing their workflows to minimize the financial punishment of the telecommunications infrastructure.
The idea of financial punishment leads us directly into the second major revelation of this hardware setup, because we have talked about the modem as a gateway. But the source material reveals that the black plastic box wasn't just a communication device.
No, it was doing double duty.
It was a highly sophisticated digital padlock.
It was a lock that fundamentally redefined the relationship between hardware and software ownership.
Tony's review gets incredibly granular about this. He notes that if you took a standard screwdriver and removed the two small screws holding the plastic casing of the modem together, you would expose the printed circuit board.
Right, the guts of the machine.
And sitting right there among the standard communications circuitry was a highly specific component, a serialized EPROM chip.
EPROM.
Which stands for Erasable Programmable Read-Only Memory.
The inclusion of that serialized chip is the most aggressive engineering choice Commodore made. They referred to this specific component as their ace in the hole against the rampant culture of software piracy.
This is where the history of networking intersects with the history of digital rights management, or DRM.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
We usually associate DRM with modern gaming ecosystems. You know, the idea that you buy a game on a digital storefront, but you don't really own it. You just own a license. And the game constantly checks a server to verify that your specific account has permission to launch the code.
And if the server says no, the game won't run.
Right. But what Commodore engineered here in 1984 is essentially a hardware-level execution of that exact modern philosophy.
The modem functioned as an unclonable physical dongle. Sure. Every single EPROM chip manufactured by Commodore was flashed with a unique serial number.
So no two modems were exactly alike.
Correct. When you purchased the modem and registered for your £30 annual subscription, your name, your account details, and that specific hardware serial number were bound together in Compunet's central mainframe.
They became a single immutable identity.
Yes.
So if I navigate into the software park, which was the commercial retail sector of the Compunet network, and I decide to purchase a new premium game, what is the exact sequence of events happening under the hood?
Okay, so when you authorize that purchase, the Compunet server doesn't just send you a generic file of the game. Before the data even begins transferring over the phone line, the server cryptographically watermarks the game's executable code with the specific serial number of the EPROM chip currently plugged into your machine.
Wow.
The software you download is bespoke to your hardware.
That is a staggering level of restriction. It means if I download that game, use a PUT command to save it to my own floppy disk, and then I physically carry that floppy disk across town to my friend's house to play it on their Commodore 64.
The software will absolutely refuse to execute.
Even if my friend has their own Compunet modem plugged in.
Even then, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
When the game boots up, the first thing the code does is interrogate the EPROM chip on the cartridge port. It asks, "Are you serial number 4892?"
And if the friend's modem replies, "No, I am serial number 71104.
The software terminates the boot sequence. It is a perfectly airtight, closed loop. Without the specific hardware key present at the time of purchase, the digital file is entirely useless.
That is a massive escalation of control. We complain today about console manufacturers issuing hardware bans or digital storefronts revoking licenses, but Commodore was treating a physical piece of plastic like an airtight software license 4 decades ago.
They were way ahead of the curve.
And what I found truly shocking in the source material is that they weren't just passively denying access, they were actively punitive.
The DRM enforcement mechanisms they engineered were incredibly draconian. I mean, Tony's review explicitly warns users about the dangers of trying to circumvent the lock.
What did he say?
He notes that attempting to run protected Compunet software without the correct modem present could produce a variety of hostile effects, ranging from the program simply crashing back to the command prompt to, and I'm quoting directly here, the drastic wiping out of your disk.
That is the line that stopped me in my tracks. They would wipe your floppy disk.
Yes.
That isn't just a block, that is a digital booby trap. How does a piece of hardware instruct a game to format a disk?
It is relatively simple to program, actually. The game's boot sequence contains a conditional logic branch. If the hardware interrogation returns the correct serial number, it branches to the game code.
And if it doesn't?
If the interrogation returns an incorrect serial number, it branches to a subroutine that sends a command to the 1541 disk drive, instructing it to initiate a format procedure,
That is insane.
effectively erasing the local media as punishment for attempted piracy.
It is actively destroying the user's local hardware data. That is an incredibly aggressive posture for a corporation to take against its own consumer base.
It really is. And occasionally they opted for psychological warfare rather than data
Oh,
destruction.
this is my favorite part of the research.
There is a deeply illustrative anecdote in the archival material surrounding this era. It comes from Gail Wellington, who was a prominent figure working for Commodore at the time. She was being interviewed on an old technology radio program called Chip Shop, and she was explaining the lengths they went to in order to protect their premium titles, specifically a highly popular game called International Soccer.
So what did they do for international soccer?
She explained that if a user somehow managed to bypass the initial file protections, copy the game, and attempt to boot it up without the registered modem, the system would actually let them believe they had succeeded.
So it wouldn't wipe the disk right away.
No. The game would load, the title screen would appear, the graphics would render perfectly, you would press start, and the animated soccer players would dynamically run out of the stadium tunnel onto the pitch.
They let you get all the way into the simulation.
Exactly. You think you've won. But the moment the players hit the grass, the delayed DRM check would execute. The code would realize the modem was missing. But instead of crashing or wiping the disk, the game would trigger a specific animation sequence.
I love this.
All the soccer players on the pitch would suddenly stop, turn around in unison, and run right back up the tunnel, leaving you staring at an empty field.
That is phenomenal. It is not just a denial of service. It is a theatrical performance of you being denied access.
It's pure spite.
It really is. It is the developers mocking the pirate to their face. But it forces a larger historical question. Why were Commodore and Compunet willing to deploy disk-wiping booby traps in theatrical DRM?
Right.
Was the software piracy landscape in 1984 really that devastating that it warranted treating every single customer like a potential criminal?
To understand the necessity of the EPROM chip, you have to understand the existential threat facing the UK software industry at that precise moment. The primary distribution medium for home computer software in the early 1980s was the standard compact audio cassette.
Which everyone had.
And cassettes are inherently analog and utterly trivial to duplicate.
Right. Any teenager with a standard dual-deck boombox could put the original game in Deck A, a blank tape in Deck B, and press play and record simultaneously. You have a perfect copy of the game in 10 minutes.
Exactly. There was a massive decentralized culture of playground piracy. Kids would buy one copy of a 15-pound game and duplicate it for their entire classroom. Professional software houses were hemorrhaging potential revenue.
Just losing a fortune.
Now, introduce Compunet into that environment. Compunet is asking these professional development studios to place their premium 15 or 20-pound games onto a digital network. But the fundamental nature of a digital network is that downloading a file is functionally identical to copying it.
Because you are moving data from a server to a local machine?
Yes. So the software houses are terrified that if they put their game on Compunet, one single user will buy it, download it to a cassette, and then use their boombox to pirate 50 copies for their neighborhood.
They needed reassurance.
Precisely. If Compunet could not guarantee the security of the asset after it was downloaded, no serious software house would ever agree to utilize the platform. They would just stick to selling physical boxes in retail stores where they had slightly more control.
So the hardware lock was a necessary evil.
The serialized EPROM hardware lock was the only cryptographic guarantee Compunet could offer. It was a promise to the developers. We can ensure that even if the file is infinitely duplicated, it will only ever execute on the specific machine of the person who paid for it.
It binds the data to the plastic.
Exactly. The dongle was the foundational trust mechanism that allowed a commercial digital storefront to exist at all.
So the lock is what makes the economy possible. Okay, let's move past the gateway. We have paid our 417 pounds. We have endured the multi-minute RAM download. We have survived the EPROM DRM check.
We are finally inside the walled garden.
Exactly. How did a user in 1984 actually navigate through this early version of cyberspace?
Well, if you approach Compunet expecting the visual grammar of a modern operating system,
Yeah.
a desktop environment with a mouse cursor, overlapping windows, and a search bar, you have to completely reset your expectations.
Because none of that existed yet.
Right. The entire architecture of this system was arranged in a rigid, hierarchical tree structure.
It is essentially a massive branching filing cabinet.
Exactly. It operates on the same logic as their competitors, Micronet and Prestel. You start at the very top of the hierarchy, the trunk of the tree. From there, you are presented with broad categories, say, news, software, communications.
You just drill down.
Yes. If you select software, you move down a branch to a new menu offering games, utilities, educational. You continue making selections, moving further and further down the branches until you finally arrive at a leaf.
And the leaf is the actual page of content. It is the text file you want to read or the program you want to download. It is very similar to how modern URLs are structured, with slashes delineating directories, but you have to manually walk through every single directory to get to the file. But how do you actually execute those movements? There is no mouse.
Navigation was entirely keyboard-driven, facilitated by a specific user interface element anchored at the bottom of the screen. Tony's review notes that the Compunet community affectionately referred to this command strip as the Duckshoot.
The Duckshoot. It is a wonderfully evocative 1980s computing term.
Isn't it?
I was looking at the screenshots of the interface, and the name makes perfect sense. You have this horizontal bar running along the bottom edge of the CRT monitor. Inside the bar are specific action commands. dir, back, show, put, goto, leave, help LP.
The mechanics of using it were very mechanical. You use your up and down cursor keys to highlight which branch you wanted to travel down on the main screen.
And then?
Then, you used your left and right cursor keys to move a highlight box horizontally along the Duckshoot strip, literally like aiming a rifle in a carnival duck shooting gallery, until you rested on the action you wanted to take.
So if you wanted to see inside a folder,
You aimed at dir for directory and hit enter. If you hit a dead end, you aimed at bvsic and hit enter to retreat up the branch.
it sounds highly logical, but also incredibly tedious. Every single movement requires a specific sequence of keystrokes, but the real tension of navigating the Duckshoot wasn't the clunky interface, was it?
No, not at all.
The tension came from the fact that every second you spent navigating that branching tree was actively draining your bank account.
This is where we have to discuss the connection fees, because they fundamentally dictate the entire psychology of the user experience.
Tony lays out the pricing structure, and it is brutal. If you access the Compunet system during peak daytime hours, essentially standard office hours, there was an hourly connection fee of £6.50.
And it is crucial to note that this fee was entirely separate from the cost of the physical phone call you were making to the access point.
This is just the fee to exist inside the walled garden.
Exactly. To understand how aggressive that pricing is, we have to run that £6.50 through our 2026 inflation translation.
It translates to an astonishing £27 per hour.
£27 for every 60 minutes you are connected.
I want to pause and really contextualize that number. Imagine handing a teenager a modern smartphone today. You tell them they have access to Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. But you also tell them that every single hour they spend scrolling, a meter will deduct 27 pounds directly from their bank account.
It's terrifying.
How does that financial reality completely alter the human behavior of consuming digital content?
It entirely eradicates the concept of casual browsing. You cannot surf a network that costs 27 pounds an hour. You cannot fall down a rabbit hole of interesting links.
The pressure would be immense.
The sheer financial pressure forces the user into a state of hyper-intentional, stress-inducing consumption. You are not exploring. You are executing surgical strikes.
You are constantly aware of that 1200 baud download speed. Every time you select a new branch and hit DIR on the Duckshoot, you are watching the screen slowly redraw the new menu line by line, knowing that those seconds are costing you literal pence.
Every line drawn is money gone.
If you make a mistake, if you accidentally move down the wrong branch and have to use the buy a bay command to retreat, you have just wasted real, tangible money.
This extreme financial pressure is exactly why specific commands on the Duckshoot, namely show and PU, became the foundational verbs of the Compunet experience.
How do people use them?
A skilled user would map out their intended route before they even dialed the modem. They would log on, navigate the tree structure as rapidly as humanly possible, locate the specific leaf of data they required, and aim their cursor at the show do command.
Show instructs the server to blast the contents of the leaf into your Commodore's temporary memory.
Correct. And the very millisecond that download completes, you move your cursor to the PUT command.
And what does PUT do?
Takes that data out of your temporary RAM and writes it permanently to your local floppy disk or cassette tape. As soon as the disk drive stops spinning, you slam your cursor onto the leave command and sever the telephone connection instantly.
It is literally a smash and grab operation. You break into the network, grab the data, save it locally, and run away before the meter ticks over to the next minute.
Exactly. Once you are safely disconnected and the 27-pound-an-hour meter is stopped, then and only then do you actually read the text file or run the program you downloaded.
That is fascinating.
The entire user interface, the physical architecture of the hardware, and the psychological state of the user were all dictated by the terrifying cost of simply being online.
It is a fascinating ecosystem of anxiety. But what makes Compunet truly historic is that despite these astronomical costs, it wasn't merely a read-only platform where users paid exorbitant fees to consume corporate data.
No. And this brings us to the most prophetic and arguably the most important section of the entire network.
Commodore engineered a space where users could switch from being consumers to being producers. And crucially, they provided a mechanism for those users to monetize their creations.
This is the specific moment where Compunet transcends being a neat 1980s curiosity and becomes a genuine functional blueprint for the 21st century digital economy.
They called this section of the network the jungle.
That's a great name.
It is. Tony's review dedicates a significant amount of space to it, describing it as a two-way, free-for-all environment. We actually have an archival screenshot of what the jungle looked like.
And it looks very different from the rest of the network.
It abandons the stark professional blues of the main menus. It is this vibrant, slightly chaotic green screen. And scattered all over the background graphics are these little pixelated pairs of eyes just staring out at you from the negative space. It looks like the background of an arcade game.
The jungle is an incredibly apt name for the psychology of the space. It was the untamed, user-generated frontier of the platform.
Inside the jungle, the architecture allowed you to use a specific command on your Duckshoot UPLD for upload.
Right.
This command allowed any registered user to push their own data from their local floppy disk back up onto the Compunet mainframe. You could upload text files, hints and tips for games, or, most importantly, your own home-produced software.
Which is huge.
If you were a teenager who had spent 6 months locked in your bedroom coding a bespoke utility program or a puzzle game, you could upload that executable file directly into the jungle for other Compunet users to download.
And the revolutionary part is that you, the amateur creator, got to dictate the commercial value of your work. You set your own price.
It is, without any exaggeration, a fully functional, user-driven app store operating in 1984.
It really is.
It is a peer-to-peer creator economy established decades before Silicon Valley buzzwords like Web 2.0 or the gig economy even existed.
But Compunet was not operating a charity. They had built the infrastructure, and they intended to extract value from it. They were aggressively monetizing this user-generated content.
Just extracting as much as they could.
If you managed to sell a copy of your bedroom-coded game in the jungle, Compunet took a 40% commission rate on the transaction.
A 40% cut of the gross revenue.
And it was structured with a hard floor. They instituted a minimum cut of 50p per transaction.
So if we run that through our inflation calculator, it means Compunet was taking a minimum cut of £2.09 every single time someone clicked download on your software, regardless of how cheaply you tried to price it.
Let's contextualize the sheer audacity of that 40% commission. If you look at the modern digital landscape today, corporations like Apple and Google typically take a 30% cut of sales in their respective mobile app stores.
Right.
And that 30% figure has sparked massive global antitrust lawsuits, congressional hearings, and open revolts from major developers who argue that the fee is monopolistic and extortionate.
It's a huge point of contention.
Yet here is Compunet skimming 40% off the top of teenage bedroom coders 40 years ago and setting it as the industry standard.
And the financial extraction didn't stop at the point of sale. Just to have the privilege of placing your software on their digital shelf cost you money.
Oh yeah, the hosting fees?
Compunet charged the creators daily hosting fees. If you uploaded a text file, it cost you 1 penny per page per day. If you uploaded an executable program, you were charged 1 penny per 1,000 words of code per day.
You are literally paying rent on your digital shelf space. Every day your software sits on the server, your account balance is slowly bleeding.
This changes the entire dynamic of the creator. If I am a hobbyist programmer and I am paying daily rent based on the file size of my code, and Compunet is taking a massive 40% cut or a minimum £2 cut on every single sale I make.
You cannot treat this like a casual hobby.
No, I can't just upload a silly little animation I made for fun. But the financial friction is too high. I have to treat my uploads like a literal business venture with a calculated return on investment. So my question is, did this aggressive, hyper-monetized hustle culture stifle the creative joy of the platform? Or did it act as a necessary filter to ensure that only high-quality, viable products survived in the jumble?
The archival evidence suggests it functioned as a highly effective, if ruthless, quality control filter. Tony Hetherington addresses this exact dynamic in his review.
What did you think of it?
He expresses a deep skepticism about the concept of open, user-generated notice boards. He writes, "Once the system has been up and running for a while, I envisage this area getting packed with 'it's my dog's birthday' type of messages."
That specific line is incredible.
Yeah.
In 1984, looking at a green screen with pixelated eyes, Tony Hetherington perfectly articulated the exact nature of modern social media spam.
He nailed it.
He essentially predicted the mundane noise of a Twitter timeline or a Facebook feed 30 years before they existed.
He absolutely did. He recognized that if you give people a free megaphone, they will broadcast trivia. But he follows that prediction up by noting that because of the financial realities of the jungle, the more serious user will want to move elsewhere.
Because the spam gets filtered out by the costs.
Exactly. The combination of daily hosting fees and the 40% transaction cut naturally purged the ecosystem of low-effort spam. If you are paying daily rent to host your code, you are not uploading garbage.
Right.
You are only uploading a product that you genuinely believe has the commercial viability to recoup your costs and turn a profit.
It forces the amateur to become a professional.
Precisely. And the review notes that this professionalization was working. He highlights that the number of user-generated educational programs available for purchase was actively growing from 5 to 53 titles.
So people were paying to host real, useful tools.
The financial friction acted as a bridge, transitioning the community from trading free, amateurish programs on physical cassettes to operating a true, professional digital marketplace.
Compunet also introduced a mechanism to help users navigate this marketplace. They implemented a user rating system. If you bought a program in the jungle, you could rate its quality on a scale of 1 to 9.
Just like modern reviews.
The mainframe would calculate the aggregate score and display the average vote alongside the program's title to indicate its worth to future buyers. They invented the 5-star App Store review system.
It is a complete, self-sustaining ecosystem of discovery, peer review, and commercial transaction, entirely populated and moderated by the user base's financial incentives.
Okay, so we have established this bustling, hyper-capitalist digital marketplace. People are uploading code, rating it, and buying it. But for an economy of that scale to actually function, it requires supporting infrastructure.
Right.
The users need a way to communicate with each other to discuss these products. And crucially, there has to be a seamless, frictionless way to move all this money around between the buyers, the creators, and the Compunet Corporation.
And Compunet provided provided solutions for both communication and finance that were incredibly sophisticated for the era.
Let's examine the communication infrastructure first. Compunet featured a dedicated electronic mail service called Courier.
Courier.
We have a visual reference for this in the source material as well. The Courier interface abandons the green of the jungle for a stark, utilitarian purple screen. The image we have shows Tony Hetherington composing an email to a user named Nick Green, who was apparently the editor of the Compunet service.
Tony makes a very pragmatic observation about Courier in his review. He points out that despite the heavy costs of accessing Compunet, using their electronic mail service was actually cheaper than using the physical postal service.
The pricing structure for Courier was 10p per page of text,
Which, adjusted for inflation, is about 42p in today's money.
Sending a physical letter through the Royal Mail in the 1980s cost roughly the same, but you had to pay for the paper, the envelope, and wait days for delivery. With Courier, your 42p delivered the message instantaneously across the country.
That's a huge leap forward.
And if you wanted to CC someone, it was only an extra 7p for each additional recipient. It also supported closed user groups, allowing factions of users to create private, multi-person communication channels, essentially early Slack channels or Discord servers.
It provided the necessary communication backbone for developers in the jungle to collaborate, or for users to form communities around specific interests.
And if you wanted to engage with the community in real time, there was a dedicated gaming sector. One of the undisputed star attractions of the entire Compunet service was a game simply titled MUD.
MUD.
That stands for Multi-User Dungeon.
MUDs are a fascinating chapter in gaming history. They were entirely text-based, multiplayer adventure games. There were no graphics. You read descriptions of rooms and type commands like go north or take sword.
So it's like a shared interactive novel.
The specific MUD hosted on Compunet was running remotely on the mainframe servers at Essex University. You were sharing a virtual, text-based fantasy world with dozens of other Compunet users simultaneously.
Tony notes in his review that intrepid explorers would get sucked into playing MUD deep into the early hours of the morning.
Which, when you factor in the hourly connection rates, is a terrifying prospect.
Oh, the phone bills.
Even if the 27 an hour daytime rate drops slightly during the off-peak evening hours, playing a text-based game for 4 hours a night would result in a catastrophic monthly bill.
You'd bankrupt yourself fighting digital goblins.
Those intrepid explorers must have either had very deep pockets or they faced severe familial wrath when the monthly telephone bill finally arrived in the post.
That perfectly transitions us to the foundational piece of infrastructure holding this entire hallucination together. We have discussed 42p emails, £2 minimum app store cuts, daily rent for hosting files, and exorbitant hourly connection fees.
How do you actually pay for it all?
Right. How did a user in 1984 actually pay for all of this? You couldn't type your credit card number into a secure web form.
The financial architecture Compunet designed is perhaps the most insidious, brilliant, and consequential part of the entire system. When you registered your EPROM modem and paid your initial subscription, Compunet automatically issued your account a rolling credit limit of £50.
Let's apply the multiplier. They're issuing every registered user a localized line of credit worth roughly £208 in today's money.
You have this £208 digital credit facility attached to your specific hardware serial number. As you navigate the network, every financial action you take is tracked against this limit.
It's just a running tally.
If you spend 10p to send a courier email, the system invisibly deducts it from your balance. If you purchase a new utility program in the software park for £5, the system deducts it.
And if you're a seller?
Conversely, if you are a creator in the jungle and another user buys your game, your 60% cut is instantly credited back to your balance.
It is a totally enclosed microeconomy. You tracked your running total using a specific command on the Duckshoot called ACNT, which stood for account.
But the genius of the system is how they settled that ledger. At the end of every billing cycle, the Compunet mainframe would tally up your final balance.
And how did they collect?
Whatever you owed them, whether it was £5 or your entire £50 limit, they would automatically settle the debt by drawing the funds directly from your real-world high street bank account via a pre-authorized direct debit mandate.
They successfully invented the frictionless digital wallet.
They engineered painless payments. In fact, Tony Etherington specifically uses the word painless in his review to describe the mechanism. By utilizing the direct debit system, they completely separated the user from the physical, psychological act of handing over cash.
When you go to a physical store and buy a game, you have to open your wallet, look at the physical paper money, hand it to a cashier, and watch your wealth visibly diminish.
Right, there is a psychological friction to spending physical money.
But on Compunet, you aren't reaching for your wallet. You are just aiming a cursor at the Duckshoot and pressing the Enter key.
The microtransactions are rendered completely invisible. You are essentially using a modern digital shopping cart.
That's exactly what it is.
Imagine the scenario. You are exhausted, playing MUD at 2 a.m. You decide you need a new word processing utility. You navigate the tree down to the software park. You find the program. You hit the PUT command on the Duckshoot, and the money quietly, frictionlessly vanishes from your digital ledger.
It's magical thinking.
It is the 1980s architectural equivalent of Amazon's patented one-click ordering system. The user doesn't feel the psychological pain of the purchase until weeks later when the direct debit finally hits their printed bank statement.
And when you pull back and synthesize all these discrete elements, the instantaneous courier email system, the shared multiplayer world of the MUD, the direct debit frictionless wallet, the user-generated app store in the jungle, and the hardware-locked DRM enforcing it all, you realize that these were not just isolated, disparate novelties.
No, they were the foundational pillars of modern digital life. They were engineered to function together as a cohesive, highly interdependent ecosystem.
It's all connected.
The 417-pound plastic box wasn't just a modem. It was the gateway to a completely realized, self-sustaining virtual economy, operating successfully 30 years before megacorporations like Apple or Google built their own versions of the exact same walled gardens.
It truly is a staggering technological achievement, and it seems Tony Hetherington recognized the gravity of what Commodore had built. When he wraps up his review, he acknowledges the flaws. He explicitly notes the potential for the already painfully slow 1200 baud access times to degrade even further into unusability if too many users try to log on during peak evening hours.
Right, network congestion.
But despite the costs, despite the slow speeds, he ultimately concludes that purchasing the Compunet modem is a very good buy.
Which is high praise considering the price.
It is. He justifies this partly by pointing out a clever twist of interoperability. Because the Compunet client software was loaded into RAM and could be saved via CNSDAVE, clever users could theoretically utilize the hardware to access rival videotext networks like Prestel and Micronet as well, increasing the overall utility of the 417-pound investment.
He saw past the immediate friction and recognized the immense value in the overarching ecosystem. He understood that Compunet wasn't merely a peripheral toy for playing games. It was a foundational platform for the future of computing.
So as we reach the end of this exploration, we have to ask ourselves, what does the story of Compunet actually mean for us today?
It changes everything.
When we look back at the sheer ambition of this project, it completely rewrites the history of networking. It was not just a clunky, slow method for reading expensive text files on a flickering CRT monitor.
It was a fully realized, hardware-locked digital economy.
It possessed its own unique user interface, a thriving creator marketplace, and seamless, frictionless microtransactions. Yes, the entry fee was astronomical, and the hourly connection rates were comically punitive by today's standards. But the architecture was functionally perfect.
It was a complete blueprint for the 21st century.
Sitting quietly inside an undistinguished black plastic box in December of 1984.
It is a piece of history that forces us to critically re-examine the systems we casually interact with every single day. It demands that we ask hard questions about the nature of the networks we inhabit.
Exactly. I want to leave you with this to think about as you go back to your modern devices. Take a moment to mentally inventory your own digital life. Think about the recurring app subscriptions that silently drain your bank account every month.
Think about the daily fees you pay for expanded cloud storage to hold your photos.
Think about the invisible, frictionless microtransactions you authorize inside mobile games with a simple double tap of your thumb. We've spent the last 2 decades comforting ourselves with a specific historical narrative that the internet was born as a free, wild, open frontier, a vast public square designed for the academic exchange of ideas, and that it was only recently corrupted, walled off, and aggressively monetized by a handful of massive tech monopoly.
But the architecture of Compunet completely shatters that comforting narrative.
It dismantles it entirely. Compunet proves that the highly monetized 40% commission, hardware-locked DRM enforced walled garden was actually there from the very beginning. It was not a corruption of the model as the original model. So I will leave you with this final provocative thought.
What if the open web of the 1990s?
That free, ungoverned, decentralized internet that we all feel so deeply nostalgic for, what if that wasn't the default state of the digital world? What if the open web was actually just a temporary anomaly, a brief glitch in a timeline that always intended for the internet to be exactly what Compunet built, an exclusive, heavily metered, lockdown, pay-by-the-hour shopping mall? Maybe every breath we take in the digital world was always supposed to come with a meter.